Welcome, everyone, to the Surfing Historian. I'm your host, Jason Old, historian, surfer, and world traveler. This podcast is dedicated to highlighting some of the latest scholarly research in humanities, social sciences, and surf studies. So paddle out with us while we glide through the world of academia. Joining me today from Australia are my friends and colleagues, Dr. Ana Manero and Dr. Javier Leon. Ana and Javier are researchers in geography and environmental management, and avid surfers as well. Combining sound scientific knowledge with their passion for surfing, Ana and Javier investigate the value of the Noosa area on Queensland's Sunshine Coast, the latest surf spot to be declared a World Surfing Reserve by Save the Waves Coalition. On today's episode, we'll be talking about their research, which is the first of its kind to be done in Australia for more than a decade. Their work shows that direct expenditures related to surfing contribute to over 180 million Australian dollars, which is approximately 149 million US dollars, to the local economy. I'm super stoked to have you both on the show. But before we get started, I'd like to thank you, as well as our listeners, for being part of this episode of the Surfing Historian.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure speaking about surfing and being in your podcast. So thanks for the invitation.
Thanks, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a passion for research and the ocean. So I'll say a few words about myself. I'm an environmental economist working for the Australian National University, and my work now is focused on non-market valuation of freshwater resources and improve decision-making around those natural resources. And this is what I do in my, let's call it my day job. And I have a great passion for sustainable management of natural resources. And I realized that the skills that I have in terms of the economics, the natural resource management, and my understanding of surfing could be applied to the evaluation and better understanding of waves, surfing waves as a natural resource that benefits not only users, but also the local and regional communities. So I'm starting this collaboration with Javier almost as a hobby, as a side, but I do hope that in the future, surf research will be an integral part of my work as an academic.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because within academics, surfing has not been looked as a serious topic. Like most people would go like, oh, you're doing that just to surf more. And of course the answer is yes. I surf a lot anyways, but I do think it's really important to do this type of research because we're showing to not just the academic community, but everyone around how valuable is surfing and from different perspectives. So how valuable it's for the environment, for society, like the benefits that brings to local economy, to global economy. So, like surfing is a huge lifestyle. Everyone around the world. And as a surfer, it's funny to see, like sometimes I've been in the middle of, the mountains in wherever. Like I remember being like very high up in Peru, like 5,000 meters. And then you see this kid with a t-shirt, like a, Bila, like, I don't know, like some, only a surfer knows a feeling. It's like surfing is everywhere around the world. So it has a huge impact, in our day-to-day life. So I'm actually a geographer from training, like, and I'm focused mostly on the physical part of geography. So I look at waves and how sand is moved and I focus on those type of things. But of course I surf. So like, I'm very interested to keep those surfing breaks there and the way they are. So then future generations can enjoy as much as we've enjoyed. But to also like help with my expertise, how to better manage these places. And that's how kind of like I ended up getting close to the Noosa World Surfing Reserve Committee. So a few years ago, I approached them because I was delivering this course at uni, the geography of surfing. And of course, it was everything around Noosa World Surfing Reserve, which wasn't a surfing reserve back then. So Noosa was a national reserve, a national surfing reserve, and they were working towards getting it declared a World Surfing Reserve. So it was perfect timing, and I enjoyed very much working closely with the committee because these are people that are fully passionate about Noosa and surfing breaks. So it's been an amazing journey, which basically kind of like finished and started last year when Noosa was finally declared a World Surfing Reserve. So like a World Surfing Reserve is just kind of like it's trying to first identify which breaks are worth protecting, um, but also kind of like then managing and planning for its future, and how to best keep it going like the way it is. So it's been really interesting to, and I've been very lucky to kind of like put my expertise towards that purpose. I kind of like, we did a few things around Noosa, and one of the things was, of course, trying to determine the value that the reserve has from different perspectives, and that's where Ana came along, which has been amazing because her expertise are just great on this topic. So what we were trying to do was to understand basically how much money did. So the easiest, I guess, the easiest part, and I'll let Anna explain that more, but the easiest thing we could do was just trying to find out the direct expenditure, like how much people spend on surfing in Noosa, but also trying to understand other values like cultural values and so and the meaning of place, which are really important things to understand. So we did that by having an online survey. So this was a few years ago, and we were combining both like an on the beach type of survey, but also complementing that with an online survey. And the reason for that was because from previous studies, so basically a few decades ago now, Neil Lazaro did or started one of the pioneer studies on what we know now as surfonomics, and he just kind of like what he showed was two things. Like if you did online, basically just the core of surfing was going to get engaged. And by core is mostly like male, like privileged male surfers. That's kind of like the core of traditional core of surfing. So you were missing out on some of the really important voices around surfing. Female, for example, female surfers, which up here they form a huge part of the surfing population. So we were trying to work around that by directly being on the beach and trying to approach everyone. Unfortunately, we
Javier,
weren't that successful.
yeah, Javier,
But
I'll just jump in there, if that's okay. And that's
sure.
essentially important. That's what when we do this kind of research, that's what we call self-selection bias, that people are really passionate and want to have their voices heard, and people who maybe a bit like, they don't. But doing the studies, you can correct those sort of biases. And this was only a first study. What I would like to say is that the evaluation of Noosa could be expanded. We could do another study where we could have not only 150 people, but we could have like thousands, and that would be more representative. And to do that sort of studies, obviously, when they can be planned and they can be rolled out both on-site and off-site, and both those techniques have advantages and disadvantages. But that's when we'll get a better picture, more comprehensive understanding of the different values, as Javier said.
Yeah, thank you guys for filling me in on your work. And you Javier, you mentioned the term surfonomics. And there was an article that just recently came out in the BBC, which we'll add to the description of the podcast. But they call this idea, well, they refer to it as the idea of using economics to assess the value of surfing resources. They branded this term surfonomics, and it's been around, according to them, for a little over a decade. And apparently one of the first surfonomic valuations, if I can use that term, was centered on mavericks in California. And so my question for you all is, when you all think of surfonomics, or when you all apply this, this surfonomic or economic valuation to Noosa and other places, as you said, Ana, can be expanded. What do you all mean by surfonomics, and how does it apply to your research?
Thanks, Jason, for the question. This is something I'm extremely passionate about, and also links to the work that I'm doing now, not only on surfing, but also on valuation of other resources. And we, as surfers, we feel that we belong to the ocean, and the ocean it gives us something more, something that money cannot buy. And we know that money doesn't buy happiness, but if that surf break was to be taken away by erosion or climate change or water pollution, how much would that be worth to you? How much would your happiness be taken away? And there is a way that environmental economists have developed through decades of refined methods to try to attach a value to those invaluable, those intangible values. And there's a lot of criticism, which is very healthy in academia, around the pros and cons of these methods, and people saying, oh, you cannot just put a price tag on the invaluable. And we are not putting a price tag on the invaluable. We're just translating. These exercises are translation from something that is intangible, almost inexplicable. We are translating those values into a dollar value that politicians, policymakers, land planners, people who are making decisions on which breaks to protect, which investments in the public interest to make, we're talking dollars to talk to them, but we are not putting a price tag on those resources. So what surfing economics does is exactly doing that, is asking people who surf or who benefit from the surf in indirect ways, how much is this worth to you? And there's different techniques that we can use. The travel cost is the one that's most widely applied, the one that's been applied to Mavericks, and to other places, as you can see in the Surf the Wave Coalition website. And you may remember that ad that a famous credit card put out that's saying something like, flight to the Bahamas, $2,000, snorkeling gear, $100, so snorkeling in a pristine environment, priceless. And this is exactly what travel costs us. They're asking people, how much did you spend in travel? How much did you spending in food? How much did you spend here? And combining that, they try to come up with a proxy dollar estimate of how much people value. But these only gives information about the direct value that people attach to it. And we environmental economists call the holistic value around it the total economic value. And Javier interestingly mentioned before that he would like the Noosa break to be there for future generations. And that, as we at environmental economists, we call that a bequest value. So we have tools, very sophisticated and very science-backed tools, that we could ask people questions around, how much is this worth to you for future generations? Even a break that you may never travel to, but you sort of value its existence. There's tools that we could use to really understand the whole value of surfing. And this is what's being coined as surfing economics or surfonomics.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, or helping myself as well as the listeners have a better understanding of what you all mean when you use that term. And as you said, just to sort of substantiate some of the things you were talking about, in 2010, New Zealand became the first country to establish legal protection for surf breaks at a national scale, and setting a precedent for statutory protection elsewhere. And so, like you say, this sort of research and work is important for policymakers and others to understand as you guys are talking about, the economic valuation of surfing and surf breaks. Before I get going too far, maybe one of you all can help our listeners, put a pin on the map, if you will, of where is the Noosa Surfing Reserve?
Noosa is a few, 150 k's north of Brisbane on the east coast of Australia. It's a beautiful place. It's quite unique because it's very far north of kind of like the prevailing southeasterly winds and waves of the east coast. So it does get all of that really clean and groomed waves. And it's like there's a few breaks around the headland. So Noosa is a headland, so it has 5+ breaks or point breaks around it, which are nicely protected from the wind. So when you put all of these together, it just produces these beautiful world-class point breaks that we get to enjoy most days. On top of that, Noosa has had a very active history in conservation. So back in the 60s, or even before, there was a huge push for development, but a strong group of formed by the community opposed that and lobbied and eventually were successful on declaring the headland as a national park. So not only Noosa has these amazing waves, like beautiful long waves, but it's backed up, those waves are backed up by a national park. So it makes the place very special. And of course, it makes the place very crowded because everyone wants to go there. It's just one of those places. I mean, like the first time I came to Noosa like 10 years ago, I knew I wanted to live here. I'm like, I come from Peru. Peru has like the most amazing waves ever. Like the consistency in Peru is unrivaled. Like you can surf every day in Peru. It's not necessarily crowded. There's more waves than surfers. So, um, it was hard walking away from that, but Nusa is a very special place, and both Peru and Nusa has a big place in my heart. But of course, yeah, everyone wants to go and surf Nusa. So on a given day, like on a normal day, you will be surfing with at least 30 people, right? But on a good day, Nusa gets, I've counted, so this is not, I've counted them, like 350 people on a good day, right? So that, and most people like surf longer boards. So there's times where you cannot even turn around, like literally you're sitting there and you're parked in by 10 longboards around you. So everyone wants a piece of Nusa. So the big question for me was like how to keep this going, how to share the love with like not just people now, but into the future, right? So how do we manage this break and all of the breaks around the world for the future? How do we, yeah, there's an increasing surfing population, there's increasing environmental threats, there's all of this happening. So we cannot just leave breaks to self-organize organically, right? Like we're not back in the 60s where the population was very small, there were heaps of breaks around, and like people, like if a place had like 10 surfers, then people would go somewhere else, right? Now we have to actively manage these breaks, and that's where surfing reserves and world surfing reserves are quite useful as a I guess as a framework to better manage this place. And I've seen this happening throughout. Like I come from Peru, as I've mentioned many times now, like, but it's quite topical because Peru was kind of like pushing for this law, like the ley or the protección de rompientes, law to protect surfing breaks way back. So they started the origins of that law, which was finally approved in 2017, I think. But the origins of that law went way back to the 90s, where one of these like flagship waves in Peru, Cabo Blanco up north, like perfect barrel, beautiful wave. This is where Ernest Hemingway sat down and fished like Big Merlin and stuff. This is an amazing place in the world. But anyway, so there was an issue with the wave because there's this fisherman pier that goes through it. And of course, after attack of many years of these huge waves on the pier just came down to pieces. So they had to basically rebuild it. And fishermen wanted to build it through the wave, literally through the middle of the wave, right? So surfers, back then a smaller group, went like, well, we have to stop this because they're going to basically stop the wave or at least negatively impact the wave. And they lobbied and they did a lot of really good work that eventually ended up on a compromise. Like they built the pier a little bit further down the wave. So even though the wave got cut, and shortened a little bit, still is an amazing wave. But that kind of like was the origins of this, and they pushed through 2 decades, 3 decades, and eventually a law was declared and implemented to legally protect waves in Peru, which has been a great achievement. So now there's New Zealand and Peru legally protecting waves. Chile is not that far from it, and many other countries are coming on, to play along to legally protect waves. And I think Australia is probably a little bit lagging right now. Although there's a lot of political will to at least give world surfing reserves a more like tighter legal protection. So that's happening as we speak. But there's definitely a need for more breaks to be protected legally, not only here but around the world. And I think Save the Waves is doing a great work on that regard, on those regards.
And you're right, Javier, and that legal experts play a massive role in protecting the environment. But another interesting thing about surfing research is that it brings together academics for all fields of research. We have Jason, who's a historian, you're a geographer, I'm an economist. We have legal experts. So it does bring that understanding from a multiple perspective for one common goal, which is like protect the waste for the riders and for the local communities. And that example that Javier mentioned, that conflict between the fishermen and the surfers, there's examples like that everywhere in the world. And some of them get resolved in a friendlier manner, some don't, around like protest or negotiation. But what I want to reinforce is that now we have tools that provide the data that decision makers need. It will be science-backed. It's not only about people protesting with a placard. It's really understanding the benefits and the costs and all the options, so people can make decisions based on data, based on a real information that will bring the people who are against it, people who are pro, and different stakeholders to the table. And environmental economists have been doing this for decades in other non-market values. And a non-market value is something that we value, but you cannot just go to the shops and buy it. You cannot just go on Amazon and buy 3 koalas. But there's been hundreds of studies valuing the value of biodiversity, the value of clean air, the value of cultural heritage protection. So now we have these tools to value surfways so we can make those decisions that benefit everyone.
Absolutely. And Javier, the Ley de Rompientes was in 2014, actually. And so, you give a great example with Peru of this long history of sort of defending the waves, if you will. And as you very well know, Peru has a long history of surfing, arguably one of the first places where surfing started. And, Ana, as you said, we can use this data to substantiate the value of surfing. And, my research that I did and that I continue to do in Nicaragua, at least in 2018, when there was the socio-political upheaval, I used the data from the Institute of Tourism to show how surfing actually, in many respects, served as an economic lifeline during this time where there was socio-political upheaval, but yet surfers did continue to go surf because of those uncrowded world-class waves they had access to. And so, but, I don't want to focus too much on my work. I'd rather talk about the work you guys are doing specifically. And so you said that the purpose of this study was to collect preliminary data on market and non-market values of surfing anemone at Noosa, Australia. And so how did you guys go about doing this? Like I said, I was using some Institute of Tourism data to substantiate what I was trying to show. But what information do you guys use to substantiate this value that you're placing on surfing in the Noosa area?
So from the online survey, we were asking questions like, how much money do you spend, on like your day-to-day coming to surf, like on food and fuel and accommodation and stuff. And then also we were asking like, on an average year, how much money would you spend on boards and wetsuits and other appeal, right? But we were not only interested in that direct expenditure. So we were also asking about things like, how do they perceive the place? Like, or what's their favorite break? And if something happened, like for some reason they couldn't surf that, what's the second one? And there's the third one. And, I'll say all of these scenarios were giving us information for like kind of like putting this into different economic models, I guess, that could help us answer questions like, if, I don't know, like if something happened into a future, like let's say overcrowding, which is a big issue, because we were asking like, what type of things will slow you down or will just like make you not come to Noosa anymore, right? And the big ones that came up were, of course, crowds. Like crowds were the top ones, but crowds and parking, right? Like if you've ever been in Noosa, you can definitely understand that it's huge. But other things like water pollution, for example, that was a huge one that's a huge factor deterring people coming to surf. So, that's kind of like going more into environmental aspects as well. And of course, things like other experiential factors like surf rage, security, all of those things, right? So now we can go beyond just the dollar value, right? And we can understand better the behaviors of people around the surfing lineup. But one thing that was really interesting out of these answers was that our average, or our average surfer, right, based on this, having said that, it was a very small kind of like number of people that responded, only 150, but from that data, our average surfer, our common surfer, it's basically somewhere around 25 to 34 years old, right? So young surfer, has a full-time job and earns like 60, 100 kind of like $1,000 a year, Australian dollars, which is quite significant. They also have a university degree. So we're talking about here not your classical like surf bum, right? We're talking about an educated, wealthy, surfer, um, and that spends at least surfs 2 or 3 times a week. So between 2 6 hours a week. And but other things like they drive by themselves, right? So even though crowding is a huge issue, most people will drive their own private cars, right? By themselves, like not even carpooling. So this is a huge kind of like, going like, wait, what's going on? Because if parking is an issue, so this is information management can use to, probably improve public transport, right? That has a like environmental, social, and economic benefits. So those type of things. But one of the biggest issues, I guess, and one of the biggest caveats of our study was translating those numbers into actual extrapolating that to the whole population, right? And this has been a recurrent issue with studies trying to put a value on surfing, and that's answering the easiest of question, right? Like how many surfers are out there? Because there's so many estimates of how many and people use these numbers, like, yeah, like there's, I don't know, like last time I heard it was like 10 million people, 10 million surfers in Australia, whatever. Like, people just use these numbers, but in reality, um, it's really hard to quantify, right? Especially like count how many surfers are out there, because surfers come with waves, and that's a very cyclic process, and that's not a constant thing. It's not like soccer or some other sport where you go to a stadium and you count how many people are there, right? Like this is like on a good day, like the crowds can be, I don't know, 10 times more, 20 times more than
or even
your
during the
average
lockdown.
day.
Javier, do you remember with about this time of the year with the lockdown, people couldn't go to work or
Lockdown was
study?
crazy. Like lockdown,
In
like
Perth, people said like, "Oh, that the waves where I live in Perth on the west coast, the waves are not amazing in the metro area, although they could be improved." But during the lockdown, there was literally hundreds and hundreds of people. So this is all the potential surfers, people who don't surf maybe because they don't have the time, or because it's too far, or they couldn't be, they have other constraints. But as Javier said, if we collect more data, you really understand what are the drivers, what are the potentiality of seeing waves as a resource. We could better understand and make better decisions. And even again, it's not about putting a price tag, but it's saying, well, if people value this break this much, how could it be improved? Maybe where we live in Western Australia, even very simple, very cheap things like a surf cam. People make the decisions on where to go based on the surf forecast. So everyone thinks, oh, this break will be good. And then you turn out and it turns out that the sandbar is not there and the wave doesn't peel properly. So now everybody is crowding a spot where the surf is not great, where there could be somewhere else where would be better. So maybe something simple of installing surf cams by the local council can help people make better decisions on where to go and spread the crowds. And you then avoid having, as Javier said, 50 people just fighting for an ankle height wave, or they could be somewhere else, or they could be, doing something else with their lives. So just using that information to make better decisions for public investment.
Yeah, in Noosa it's very interesting because the current council, so it's basically 6 councillors. 2 of them are like, die-hard surfers, like they surf every day. Our previous council, like the mayor, was a hardcore surfer. So here in Noosa, the surfing culture is huge. Like it's it's part of the common. I mean, like I would argue that the huge, because Noosa's like main beach is a huge touristic hotspot in Australia, um, and most people come either for surfing, directly surfing, or because they are attracted to surfing culture. So surfing is what makes Noosa. I would argue that surfing is what makes Noosa. So if for some reason that surfing culture gets negatively impacted, then we will have, I would argue again, this is not based on data, this is just a few hypotheses out there, but that tourism, overall tourism would also negatively will be negatively impacted. So surfing is very important, and this type of studies, this type of research helps communicating that to policy managers, because we, like, if anyone knows how good surfing is, like is us, like surfers. We know that, and you don't have to explain that to anyone. But if we want to translate that, and instead of going like, yeah, it's pumping and the bar, like actually talking to other people, I think that's where we have a common language here on this type of research.
Yeah, and it's not only the tourism it's just a small thing. No, the tourism is not only great, but just think like real estate, people buying property there. And there's been just one study across the whole world in California, Santa Cruz, done by Dr. Scores. And we could do the same in Noosa, couldn't we, Javier, or Yallingup or anywhere, to look at the house prices. And this is like a caveat to the travel cost. Some people buy property, $1 million property, so they could walk to the surf. So when you ask them, oh, how much money did you spend today? They say, oh, nothing, because I live literally within walking distance. But that value is captured in real estate. And land councils should care about this, local councils, because they derive their property taxes from house prices. So if you're a councillor or someone working in land planning and you have waves at your doorstep, you have to look at the waves as like rolling piles of cash will increase the price of the real estate because people want to live there. And in the pandemic, now people can live remotely. You can live from anywhere. Now, Jason, you're saying you're going to go and live somewhere so you can still teach. So now that people don't need to live close to where they work, where would you live if you could live anywhere? And if you're a surfer, the answer is probably somewhere where the waves are good. So there is an interest there in understanding what value those waves bring to real estate, because that's dollars. And if you're a land councillor or a planning official, if that's what you're interested in, then we can help collect the data and translate that for you. And and for the people who serve, that would just mean being stoked, sharing something that you're passionate about with your family, and that is priceless.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the real estate aspect of it. And, Javier as well, like talking about, just Noosa in general, because you guys actually in your research, you guys say that you've taken a holistic approach to surfing, not just people being in the water. And so I guess it seems self-explanatory, but when you guys say you've taken a holistic approach, and Ana, I know you just mentioned real estate and other things to consider in this economic valuation, but when you guys say you've taken a holistic approach, not just, counting bodies in the water, what does that mean for you all when you consider an economic valuation of a place like Noosa?
What we mean with a holistic approach is that we're integrating the information that we get from this survey into a broader framework, which economists call the total value framework. And that is saying that the number what we're getting from this study is only like a small slice of the pie. There's other bigger chunks of the pie that would require a more sophisticated data collection systems. But as Javier said, the beauty of this study, despite being small, is that it collected both quantitative data, how many people are there, how long did they spend in the cars traveling there, and qualitative data. They were telling us their stories like, oh, this is important for me because this and this and this, or if this break was to be taken away, this is what it would mean to me. So I think what we mean by holistic is that we will integrate this data into a broader framework, and we also look at both quantitative and qualitative perspectives.
And then just to add to that, like, I guess from my personal research as well, eventually what I want to better understand is how different factors like like biophysical factors will affect the surf quality in Noosa, because we cannot take that as a given, right? Like surf quality changes with time. Even on point breaks where you have like a nice setup with like rocks and stuff, it's still quite dynamic, right? So it especially in Noosa, the point breaks in Noosa, they rely a lot on the movement of sand. So for example, first point, which is like the main break, one of the main breaks around the headland, has not been working for a full year now, almost maybe even more, maybe a year and a half. It hasn't, like, it's broken twice, and not even to what it used to be. And that's just because we were kind of like, we had a few cyclones a few years ago, so Oma and then Uesi, which just changed the configuration of the sandbanks totally. And because we haven't had anything significant since, that sand hasn't placed where it should be. So like first point is not working, right? So other breaks, some of the other breaks have been actually better, like for but I mean, that's just to kind of like show that wave quality changes, and it is going to change. And it's all the forecasts we have right now are kind of like pointing towards things are going to change quite significantly around Noosa, like same in transport pathways, and all of that is going to change. Cyclones are going to, come closer, be stronger. So all of those factors, I think we need to eventually incorporate as well into all of this economic modeling, because we have the tools now to predict those behaviors. So we need to use them, and when planning, we need to take all of those into account. I mean, like, sea level rise is, of course, everyone talks about sea level rise, and then people go like, oh, if sea level rise is half a meter or a meter, then that's kind of like equivalent of a high tide break, right? But it's not that simple. Like, the coast doesn't behave that simply. Like, it's not, doesn't have a linear response, right? It's not like we put more water, we see this. It's like there's all of these like non-linear processes happening that are going to have a profound effect on the surf quality of some breaks. So we need to take that into account as well.
Yeah, Javier, you're totally right. This, as you said before, only a surfer knows a feeling. There's so many things that come into play for a good break, whether it's the wind, the swell period, the height, the direction, the standby, the bathymetry. A lot of people who don't surf don't understand that. And typically waves only break at a certain ratio between the wave height and the depth. And if you change the bathymetry, if the sand is not there, the wave doesn't break. It just doesn't happen by miracle. And the beauty of surf research is that it brings people who are expert academics in the fields, but they're also surfers. And that's, I don't want to say this is a niche area of research or we are exclusive, but correct me if I'm wrong, Javier, but I think it would be very difficult to be able to do this research properly if you're not a surfer yourself. And this may be a reason why we still haven't seen those breakthroughs in surf research, as opposed to research in biodiversity or conservation of other natural resources, because you need to be a surfer to understand this and to be able to do the research properly, because of the complexity of the decision making, the complexity of all those factors that come into play.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny when I speak to surfers on the lineup, and most people, especially older, and again, Noosa has a above average age. Like people like are older and have been surfing for longer, on like within the Noosa crowd. And most of these surfers have seen cycles of like 20, 30 years happening already. So they know that there's this beautiful rich knowledge within the lineup that it's there, and they go like, oh, why are you doing research on this if we already know? And I'm like, well, research is just capturing that knowledge and just systematically capturing that knowledge and putting it on paper, so then it's not lost in memory or distorted and stuff. Because so that's what we're doing. It's just we are just putting on paper all of this knowledge that already I can call it traditional knowledge even. Like I still think like we have to acknowledge all of these like elders we have on the lineups and around the surfing culture. There's so much stuff they know from experience, because if someone knows about consistency and like going out there every day and experimenting every day, are surfers. Like surfers will be out there on the good, on the bad days, every day, right? And they will see how the beach changes, the waves change, like all of these things. So yeah, I think it helps a lot being a surfer and an academic to capture all of that and understanding where where those complexities on the subtleties are.
Yeah, I mean that's really at the heart of the podcast. The Surfing Historian podcast is to bring together individuals like you all who are surfers and academics, and just apply academics to the surfing world, whether it's geography or oceanography or economics or history. And so I think that's really, you really articulated well what the the underlying heart of the podcast is as well. And so I do want to talk about surfing history and surfing briefly, because at least in my research in Nicaragua, I show I historically contextualize the rise of effectively surf tourism. And so what I found, at least in my research, is that surfers in many cases are the frontiersmen or frontiers women of certain places, right? They sort of blaze the trail, if you will. And so, is that the case for Noosa? In other words, were surfers some of the first to show up on the scene there? And because that in and of itself, at least in the case of Nicaragua, what I'm working on, it brought value to the area, as in terms of things like, as you said, Ana, real estate and whatnot. And so this question's for both of you, really, but was that the case for Noosa? In other words, what's the history of Noosa as far as who were the first people to show up in large numbers? What was it, surfers?
Yes and no. So in Australia, surf life saving culture is huge, and it has over 100 years. So I would say they were the first one. So main beach, I mean, there was this incipient tourism coming to Noosa's beach. And I would go even further, because I mean, even though there's not much evidence, like the traditional owners of the land in Noosa, the Gabi Gabi people, they've been here for a long time, and they definitely surf. Like they had to surf. Like it's beautiful surf. They had to surf. They were, they're like keen fishermen. They're always out there. I know for sure they scored beautiful surfing in uncrowded Noosa. But fast forward, few thousand years, and then there's a few kind of like bits and pieces of history, like people coming to Noosa for some reason or the other. But anyway, I guess back in the 20s, people started coming more as tourists to Noosa, and again, that had to do a lot with the headland protecting from the prevailing wind. So it's a beautiful place. Even now, I mean, like you can tell, like it's raining and windy, and then you go across the headland, and main beach is just paradise, like beautiful weather, beautiful water. So but once people started going to Noosa, then the first surf life club got installed or built at main beach, and it was these surf life savers, which usually were and still are pretty keen surfers, that I guess discovered the value of the waves in Noosa, and they were like, going like, yeah, this is amazing. And as the voice kind of like spread around, more and more surfers came and surfed Noosa, and they started surfing beyond main beach and going to the other points around the headland. So definitely, surfers were the pioneers of that incipient tourism, the early incipient tourism. And if you fast forward to the 60s, when longboarding, like surfing was basically longboarding, and longboarding was going through all of these kind of like experimentations, and it was like the start of the shortboard revolution. That all boiled down around Noosa, like like Greenough and McTavish and all of those guys were just like, and Nat Young were just experimenting around the Noosa waves with these different boards and stuff, and that's where literally the shortboard revolution started, and then that like diffused around the world. So Noosa has always been a really significant hotspot for surfing culture, but that kind of like slowed down a little bit as shortboards became the main surf craft. during the 80s and the 90s. But there was always this longboard crew around Noosa that were the lucky ones. They were the ones that were scoring Noosa without a crowd. So they were the real lucky ones. But then once longboard started becoming trendy again, then everyone turned around to Noosa, and nowadays it's just like amazing. Not only, I mean, like, it's not only about longboarding, but it also there's a myriad of surfcraft on the lineup every day. But the beauty, I guess, about Noosa's lineup is it's in its diversity. I mean, like, it's not only the types of surfcraft, but also the wide range of like age groups, and you have like everyone from like little kids to, I mean, guys and ladies hitting like 80. Like, I've surfed with people that are 80 years old, which for me is like, I look so like up to these people. So yeah, it's a beautiful lineup, and that's also kind of like was translated into our answers for the service. I mean, like, 1 out of 5 respondents was a female surfer, which doesn't sound like much, but it is a lot. And you have places like Noosa and Byron Bay and maybe Canggu in Bali, like a few places where there's a significant component of female surfers on the lineup, which is great because it kind of like pushes that diversity in the night. So it's not all about the one type of surfing. It's, you have this range of surfing cultures like overlapping with each other, which makes Noosa such a special place, I guess.
Yeah, Javier, it's really good that you bring up that diversity of surf crafts. And some people switch from one to another. Some people surf a longboard when it's certain conditions, a shortboard. And the fact that a lot of people who do surf lifesaving, which in Australia is like a club of like beach activities, they do a bunch of things. And is that I'm really glad that you brought up that concept like multi-activity. And while surfers are surfers and we go there to maximize our wave count, it is in fact like a multi-activity endeavor. You take your kids down to the beach, you also want them to go for a walk or to swim, and if the surf is not good, you may do something else. You may go for a snorkel, you may go for a swim. And where I live in Perth, it's typically good to surf in the morning and it gets really windy in the afternoon, so it's a really hot spot worldwide. It's probably the best metropolitan city in terms of wind sports. You have people hitting the waves with the kites, so you have kiteboarding. So we want to insist that it's not only about surfing. It's a holistic sport. It's a lifestyle sport. And when we do these sort of valuation studies, we want to incorporate these like multi-activities, these other users, people who go there for a surf, but they also value the walk. As Javier said, the national park is beautiful. And this is why some academics now in the surfing space start referring to these spaces not only as surf breaks, but as surf ecosystems, because we care about the surfing ecosystem. We care about the life underwater, the reefs, the health of the fish. We care about the history of the place. We care about the plants, the trees, the whole environment. So we're moving from a evaluation of surf breaks to like surfing ecosystems to really account for that, like multi-activity, like multi-purpose beach going, which, for us surfers, surfing is the best. But if you go down to the beach and it turns out that the conditions are not good, you can still do something else. You can still enjoy the ocean in a million of other ways. And that keeps bringing value to you as a person and to the community. And from a historic perspective, Jason, thanks for bringing the history. Surfing is so drilled into Australian psyche, into our history. Well, I was born in Spain and I only lived in Australia for the last 10 years, but I'm a citizen now. So I think I'm just somehow walking in two worlds. But you see the history of Australia, it's in our music. In the 60s, the 70s, the surfing was just such a big component of Australians' music. And even now, as Javier said, even the t-shirts, you see people wearing surfing t-shirts everywhere. And it's really part of our culture. Even like people who don't surf, they still identify with that surfing culture. So it still holds value for people who do not surf, but they have that existence value in them.
Absolutely. And, Ana and Javier, thank you so much for getting up so early, actually, to join me on the podcast. I want to go ahead and give you both the last word. And so feel free to tell us, all of us, the listeners, myself, what's next for your research? What are you guys up to next?
So right now, I'm trying to fill that gap when it comes to estimating the number of surfers out and how that changes through time. So I've turned kind of like around now, and I'm staying away from the waves, paradoxically, and I'm using drones. So I'm using drones to actually count people, count surfers automatically, with the aim of kind of like looking at how different wave conditions, for example, and different times of a year change that number. So then we can have a more precise estimate of that value, that surfing brings us. So I've been doing that a lot, and I'm flying my drone. Up around the Noosa's World Surfing Reserve quite a bit now. But yeah, I mean, just trying to like keep doing any type of research around this. Like my whole research really just like it's around surfing and around Noosa. So I have a few projects that are non-surf, like not specifically surf, but surf related, which deal with how sand is moving around the headland and how this is changing, or how it's changed in the past and how it's going to change within this climate change context. So yeah, like I guess I'm still coming from both ways, from more of a as a geographer, as a physical geographer, I'm looking more at the sand and the actual wave, right? But also I'm trying to complement that with a little bit more around surf and surf culture. So yeah, I mean that's where I'm at, and I would definitely suggest for everyone listening out there to go and check out what the Noosa World Surfing Reserve is doing. They also have some great initiatives how to better protect and preserve this place that we love so much. So that's basically the Noosa's World Surfing Reserve Committee, but also what Save the Waves are doing. I think their job is really important, and they are kind of like helping us look at the global kind of like conservation of surfing breaks. So yeah, any way that people can help out or contribute with Save the Waves, I think it's always a really good thing to do.
Thanks, Javier, and thanks, Jason, for the question. In my research, I'll continue working on my official project, which is on freshwater evaluation of studies. So that's my area of research for the next 5 years. And in terms of I'm a bit opposite to Javier. My sort of research is it's on the side. It's something that I'm doing on my free time, but looking forward in the next years, I really want to expand the methods applied to evaluation of surf ecosystems. So we can do travel costs, but there's also many other methods that we could apply, as we said, whether it's looking at real estate prices, but that's what we call hedonic pricing methods, and a bunch of other tools that we could use to better understand the value of surf ecosystems. And I want to bring that into applying like the tools that we use in other aspects of environmental economics. So what I would say to our listeners, and what I want to go forward, is that if you care about the surf environment, whether you're a surfer or most importantly, a decision maker, a policy maker, and you want to understand those resources in Australia, come and talk to me, come and talk to Javier if you need a valuation. We have the tools, we have the passion, and we have the knowledge to bring this information from the users to the public domain for better decision making that would improve not only the lives of the surfers, but for the local and the regional communities. And in Australia, I find this is particularly important now in times of COVID, when our borders are closed, and I really do hope they open soon. But while they're not, there's an extremely strong drive for domestic tourism, people looking to places to go in Australia. Where are those people going to go? Are they going to go where the surf is good? And if they are, how much is that worth to the local communities and to the people? So yeah, just if you want to know more about surf research, surfing economics, and you're in Australia, please come and talk to me or talk to Javier.
And yeah, thanks, Jason, for inviting us and for giving us a voice. I think it's really important what you are doing, and I've always loved anything about surfing and history. So I'm glad you are saving this and opening the conversation to beyond just surfers. So I think, yeah, it's great, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. This has been an incredible opportunity, as Javier said, to share our passion and our knowledge about surfing and really making it count, really amplify those voices for not only the surfers, but also all the other community members who benefit from the surfing, and really sharing this passion with your listeners. So thanks, Jason, and I hope we can record another episode once we have more research to report on.
If you enjoyed learning about Dr. Manero and Dr. Leon's surf research in the land down under, I'd like to invite you to join me for my next episode, where I'll be checking in with my good buddy Tom Wilson in Sydney, Australia. Tom's the founder of Wave Changer, a Sydney, Australia-based nonprofit organization. And he and I will be talking about his vision to create a carbon-neutral, waste-free surf industry that's respectful to nature, yet retains the innovation, high performance, and excitement we all expect from surfing. This will be an episode you won't want to miss. This has been another episode of The Surfing Historian. I'm your host, Jason Old. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe to never miss an episode. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time, stay stoked.